In module 2, we are going to talk about different types of benchmarking. Benchmarking is not just any one type, but there are at least three. There are different ways in which you can slice this animal of benchmarking, and we will take a look at different, at least based on two different dimensions, if you will. The first one is based on outcomes or targets. That means what it is that you want to achieve, and that is, there are three types of benchmarking based on outcomes and targets. Number one is competitive benchmarking, which is looking at your specific product or service and trying to compare it with somebody else, and so you are doing a direct competitive comparison and analysis with other products and or services that are out there in the market. The second one is process benchmarking, where you compare the processes that are being used within your organization and try to compare it with what other companies are doing to see how well you do a certain task inside your organization. And this could be anything from product design to order entry to getting releasing purchase orders, doing your accounts payable or accounts receivable. It could be a whole number of different processes, but how efficiently or how poorly you do some of these tasks are considered in the process benchmarking. And the third one is strategic benchmarking, where you look at strategies and you benchmark strategies, your strategies with the strategies of other companies. The second dimension along which we can look at benchmarking is what type of people or comparison you are going to make. Number one is when you do an internal benchmarking, where the target is within the organization. The second is external, that means outside the organization. And the third is the global or the best in class. The difference between the second and the third is that external typically would be somebody within the same industry or business, whereas when we talk about the third type, it is looking at anybody in the world, no matter what business they are in. If they do that particular task, or if they do something well, okay, you want to look at what they are doing and what they are doing extremely well. For example, I think American Express, if I remember right, was known for the speed with which it did its financial transactions, and there were a number of companies that were not in the business of credit cards, but which were benchmarking themselves against American Express when it came to that particular financial transaction. If we take a look at each one of these types of benchmarking, starting with the competitive benchmarking, it usually, as I had mentioned, compares our products and our services with those of the competitors. And one of the things that is important in all of benchmarking, whether you do competitive process or strategic benchmarking, is that before you go out and take a look at others, you need to first understand your own self. Most companies really don't have a very good view either in terms of their products or about their processes or about their strategies, and just going out there on a fishing trip trying to look at what other people do is a waste of time and effort, because you would not even know what to look for in terms of features. If you're talking about a product, you need to know what you can and or cannot satisfy in terms of a customer requirement. So you first need to develop a better understanding of your own capability, and it is only after you have a better understanding of what you are doing that you go out there and try to compare it with what the others do. The second element of competitive benchmarking is reverse engineering, which is one of the techniques which is commonly done in competitive benchmarking, where you take a product, most commonly the term reverse engineering, and I'm sure some of you are familiar with the term, but it is generally used in the context of products where you take a product of a competitor. I think the best known in this is the automotive industry, where a Toyota or a Honda or a General Motors or a Ford will buy cars of their competitors and literally take it apart and put it down in an open area part by part, okay, and then they would study each part and compare their own systems, subsystems, components with those of the competitors to see what is the difference between what their system does and what somebody else does. So if, for example, if I'm not saying that this is what would happen, but let's say if General Motors were to find that their air conditioning makes too much noise, okay, and that a Ford car has more quieter air conditioning. Now they know what to focus on in terms of benchmarking. Then they would go to the Ford car that they would have disassembled and disassemble their air conditioning, and then study all of the systems, components, subsystems of the air conditioning used by Ford to see how they are able to reduce the sound or the noise that comes from that air conditioning, and see how they can borrow ideas from that to adapt it into their own vehicles, okay. But reverse engineering basically means take apart what somebody else does in order to be able to come up with a better idea for your own self, and this can be for products as well as for services. You focus on attributes such as technical quality, what is it that makes that particular product or service different, better, superior, etc. Reliability, what is more reliable? It could be the speed. For example, if you're talking about a process even, so the speed with which let's say an Amazon or a Flipkart or Home 18 or whatever other company that you use for the purposes of online shopping, the speed with which they are able to deliver what you require, or for that matter a Pizza Hut or a Domino's, okay, the speed with which they are able to fulfill the orders. Now that could also be a way to look at different competitors and to see how you can improve what you've been doing for so long. And it is used to understand a company's competitive position so that you know how you compare with somebody else. It's only after you understand what you do, both in terms of a product as well as in terms of a service, and you compare it with what a competitor offers, both in terms of the product and or the service, that you are able to gain a better appreciation of how or where you stand in the marketplace or in the eyes of the customer. The process benchmarking is where you take a specific process or a work activity and you use it for the purpose of comparison. What is important here is that the process should be critical to the company's success, and we'll talk about this a little bit in more detail when we take a look at the whole process or the steps in benchmarking. But the idea is that if what you're looking at to compare with somebody else is not important to your business, even if you improve that particular process, you will not necessarily see a major change in the overall performance of your system or of your organization. So if you are looking to significantly improve the overall performance of your organization, you want to make sure that you identify critical processes, critical or core processes which would benefit from a very serious evaluation, and thereby improvement in those particular processes would result in significant improvement in your overall organizational performance. In process benchmarking, you can either look at an internal or an external benchmark. Because both, sometimes there are practices within organizations which have not been documented, and somebody has done something well in one area and people have either ignored it or have forgotten about it, and so there are a lot of times very good ideas that are present in an organization which we sometimes fail to tap, and so the process benchmarking can use internal sources or can use external sources. Some examples of processes that can be used for process benchmarking could be things like an order fulfillment process, a billing process, the recruitment process. How do you handle complaints? In fact, when Xerox benchmarked themselves against LL Bean, they were looking at their entire logistics process because they felt that that was an area in which they lacked, and the logistics process they felt was not up to the mark, and so they went out there and looked for the best, which they found in LL Bean, and so they try to analyze that to try and see what good ideas they could bring in-house. The third type of benchmarking is strategic benchmarking, and here what you do is, unlike products or services or best practices, you're really looking at strategies. You're looking at high-level business strategies, and you then try to see what other companies do, how do they develop their strategies, and what type of strategies work best for different companies. And here what they do is they focus on things such as, what markets to look at, what type of core competencies to consider, because if you take a look at various let's say car companies, in the past a General Motors and a Ford, etc., the American car companies used to be very much vertically integrated, and when we say vertically integrated, what we mean is that they manufactured everything that they needed, including the components and the sub-assemblies and assemblies, and also obviously the final cars. Now, as opposed to that, when they looked at the way in which the Japanese produced their cars, what they found is that Japanese tended to buy approximately 70% of the materials, components, sub-assemblies, etc., of what went into their cars from outside suppliers. And there were some significant advantages to purchasing these products from materials from external suppliers. So post 1980, one of the things that a number of the American auto manufacturers did was to go away from this business of vertical integration and to move towards a much leaner structure. So for example, if you take a look at what GM did, is they took all of their component manufacturing, which was called GM Parts, GM Parts, and they formed a company, Delphi, and further they spun off Delphi into a totally separate organization, not owned by GM at all, and they were free to purchase either from Delphi or from any of the other organizations. So they were mimicking more of what the Japanese had been doing. Similarly, Ford took all of their component manufacturing operations and converted that into a Visteon, which then became a separate company from which they could purchase components, and they could also purchase from anybody else. Implementation of strategic benchmarking obviously can take long, because the kinds of things that you need to do to change your strategy is not something where you're just taking one particular process and making modifications to that process. It is change to the entire system, because a strategy affects pretty much everything that you do in an organization. And so when you are bringing about a strategic change, that takes much longer to implement as compared to either product benchmarking or a change in the way in which your products are designed or services are designed, or the way in which your processes are operated. Generally speaking, the Japanese have tended to excel in this business of strategic benchmarking. Looking at the other dimension, which is whether you're looking internally or externally, the internal benchmarking looks for best practices within a company. And it's sort of a little bit ironic that a lot of times companies don't know what their own people in their own organization have done, and which may be noteworthy. The reason for this is because companies tend to grow very large. They have a number of different divisions, and they have a number of different units, plants, business units, and so on. And what somebody in some remote location, in some plant belonging to some division does is something which somebody else in another plant, in another division, in another location may be totally unaware of, with the result that you may have different people within the same organization either trying to solve the same problem or trying to improve a certain process or a product and trying to do this independently. And there is no reason why we should not be able to take advantage of something that somebody else within our own organization has done, rather than reinvent the wheel all the time. Also, rather than only look at what other people do when they have done something well, we also should be able to take a look at our own past successes and try to analyze that and say, if in this particular year or in this particular quarter or in this particular month we had excellent whatever performance, what was the cause of that excellent performance, either financial or operational or quality or all of the above. Okay, whatever be our measure. But if we analyze our own past successes and say, what is it that made us do well, okay, in the past, that will tell us what possibly we could do in the future in order to improve our own future performance. Quite obviously, internal benchmarking is something which is relatively cheap, because we don't really need to go out there and look for information outside the company, and there are fewer obstacles for us to cross when we do internal benchmarking. But by the same token, what we need to be careful of is that when we talk about internal benchmarking, there is a very big political issue, because there is that mindset that if I were to accept that somebody else within my organization has been able to come up with a better idea, that means I'm not the smartest person in the organization, that my division or my department or my group is not the best. And because most of the time people in organizations are trying to compete with each other in terms of bonuses and other rewards, promotions, etc., it sometimes ends up being a kind of a roadblock to accepting the ideas of somebody else within your own organization, and that is something that needs to be taken into account when we are looking at internal sources. When we talk about external benchmarking, we are over here we are looking for the best practices that happen to exist outside the company, and by and large, when we talk about just external benchmarking, we are referring to companies or organizations within the same industry. So for a car company, they would look for others which are in the automotive industry. So let's say a Maruti may be a benchmarking target for a Hyundai or for a Tata or for somebody else within the automotive industry, to see how they do certain things, whether it is in manufacturing, whether it is in spare parts, or whether it is in service, etc. So when we talk about external benchmarking, we are generally referring to other companies within the same industry, and this could either be competitive or it could be process type of benchmarking, because when we talk about external targets, we could look at the way in which their products are designed. We could look at the way in which their services are being offered. We could take a look at the way in which their processes are being operated, so that we can learn and try to compare what we do and see how we come out in comparison with the external targets. Obviously, when we are looking at external sources, this is going to require more effort, because it is not as easy trying to collect information from somebody on the outside. It may require more cost, because again, it may require travel, it may require hiring consultants, or using some external agency to collect some of that information. And it obviously requires much more preparation, because we will need to identify who is a worthy target against whom we need to compare ourselves, and therefore it is not as easy as the internal benchmarking. The external benchmarking, however, gives you a much better view of the competitive stance of the organization. That means, how do you stand with regard to the rest of the companies in the marketplace? How does a customer view you as compared to the others? The best-in-class benchmarking talks about comparing yourself not only with others within the same industry, but rather finding other people who may not belong to the same industry, may not do anything close to what you do, but they are the best when it comes to doing that particular task. So you look for the best in class, meaning anybody anywhere in the world doing in any industry which may be not even remotely connected with what you do, but it is people who do a particular task or a process the best. Generally, best-in-class benchmarking tends to be used more successfully in the case of process benchmarking. The example is when you talk about Xerox benchmarking LL Bean. I have already talked about that. Looking at the logistics and the distribution function, Xerox and LL Bean are far apart in terms of what they do. LL Bean has got nothing to do with copiers or even technical product manufacturing. Also, when you take a look at the way in which Toyota looked at or developed this whole process of Kanban, whereby products move from one stage to another based on a pull. This whole idea of Kanban was something that Taiichi Ohno, who is credited with developing the Toyota production system, he got this idea when he visited the United States, and he observed this among the grocery stores and saw the applicability of this particular approach to manufacturing in the automotive industry. So again, when you talk about borrowing from the grocery stores, the way in which they replenish material in the grocery stores, he saw was very identical to the way in which he needed to order material in a downstream operation, and therefore the Kanban system, which is a very popular system in manufacturing, especially automotive, but also in other cases, the idea came from the way in which grocery stores replenish the material when the material is depleted on the shelves in the stores. This brings us to the end of the second module, and we will take a break over here, and we will come back and take a look at the steps in benchmarking next.